head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues that we need to be looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one's going to be cancelled for saying exactly what they think. Keeping me company today is political commentator Emma Webb, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. Boris Johnson has become the first world leader to address the Ukraine Parliament. His speech invoked Winston Churchill when he told its MPs, "This is your finest hour." We'll get reaction. Plus, 15 years after Madeleine McCann vanished, her parents say they're still searching for answers. I'll be speaking to one of the first journalists in Portugal to have covered the case. And the fines dished out for COVID lockdown breaches. I'll be joined by the lawyer who's successfully challenged a whole load of them in court. That's what we're talking about for the next hour, but what do you need to talk about? Email gbnews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @gbnews. First, though, it's time for the GB News headlines with Rosie.
A very good afternoon. It's just 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. The Prime Minister has told Ukrainian MPs that their country must and will win the war. In a video link addressing the Ukrainian Parliament, Boris Johnson said, "This is Ukraine's finest hour," and they've broken what he calls the irresistible force of Putin's war machine. President Zelensky said the UK and Ukraine are now brothers and sisters. The UK government is providing Ukraine with a £300 million package of defensive military aid and is sending specialised civilian protection vehicles. Boris Johnson is the first world leader to address Ukraine's MPs since the Russian invasion began.
There were some who believed the Kremlin propaganda that Russian armour would be like an irresistible force going like a knife through butter and Kyiv would fall in days. Do you remember they said that? And people rang Volodymyr and they offered him safe passage out of the country. And he said, no thanks. And they said that this Rada of yours would have to be reformed outside Ukraine, maybe even in Poland or in London perhaps. And I refused to believe it. And today you have proved them completely wrong. Every one of those military experts who said that Ukraine would fall. And even in the parts of Ukraine that were temporarily captured, your populations, your indomitable populations turned out to protest day after day. And though your soldiers were always outnumbered, 3-1 it is now, they fought with the courage and the energy of lions. And you've beaten them back from Kyiv. You have exploded the myth of Putin's invincibility.
The Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced a new wave of retaliatory sanctions against the West. The Kremlin said it's in response to what they're calling unfriendly actions from foreign states and international organisations. According to the decree, Russia will forbid the export of products and raw materials to people and entities it's sanctioned. Well, details of which countries and firms affected by the measures haven't been provided. The Labour leader has condemned the government for inefficiency in processing of visas for Ukrainian refugees. The government's being threatened with legal action by two groups representing potential sponsors under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. They say unreasonable delays are putting refugees at risk. Sir Keir Starmer says they deserve better.
Yet again, with the Ukrainian visas and the whole scheme, we've seen a government that's behind the curve and in chaos. And this is the hallmarks, I'm afraid, of this government. The generosity of the British people has been incredible. People wanting to come forward to take refugees into their own homes, to help in any way they can. What they want is a government that matches their ambition. And in the end, what they've got is the usual shambles and chaos that we've got used to with this government, I'm afraid.
In other news now, a leaked draft suggests that the US Supreme Court will vote to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision that legalised abortion nationwide in America. The document obtained by the US news agency Politico shows that the Supreme Court would be inclined to uphold Mississippi's abortion ban. This is the first time a leak over a potential decision by the Supreme Court's been made public. The legislation changed in 1973 when the US Constitution gave the right to terminate a pregnancy. BP has announced losses of nearly £18.5 billion, despite making oil and gas profits of £5 billion in the first 3 months of this year. The loss was caused by BP cutting ties with the Russian oil producer Rosneft due to the war with Ukraine. BP now says it will invest up to £18 billion into North Sea oil and gas by 2030. Up to 40 activists from the climate group Just Stop Oil blockaded an oil terminal in Western Bartonshire this morning. In their first action in Scotland, protesters blocked the entrance of the Nustar Clydebank facility and climbed on top of tankers. Others entered the terminal sitting on pipes and silos to halt operations. Police Scotland says officers are currently engaging with activists and will protect the rights of people who wish to peacefully protest. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of fight in the dog. Boris Johnson's words as the first world leader to address the Ukrainian parliament, telling the country at war that their resilience and fights for freedom will be remembered through the generations. Meanwhile, videos of Vladimir Putin reveal a bloated, ashen face, sunken into bony shoulders, gripping the table as he spoke with his defence chief, a man visibly different from one even months ago, walking around as guest of honour at the opening ceremony of the Beijing Winter Olympics. A discernible foot tap and hand tremor appear to belie what many have said for months, that Russian leader Vladimir Putin is suffering a range of health conditions, from Parkinson's to alleged abdominal cancer and dementia, that may have him in a death spiral, making him determined to inflict the same on Ukraine. An ex-KGB agent strongly believes that the Kremlin kleptocrat may be in the throes of desperation, gripped by paranoia, and reportedly taking control of the Russian offensive himself. What his plans are to claim a victory remain unclear, with balmy rhetoric on state TV about launching a nuclear tidal wave to wipe out Britain. US military intelligence reports that the new objective is to annex the Donbass region in the east. Meanwhile, Ukraine has been successful at targeting Russian military assets, further weakening the forces of an invasion that could yet spill into desperate brutality. Strikes, which in no small part have been aided by the UK's continued support. Well, joining me to talk through this is our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, it was, I think, sort of mooted to be a very Churchillian speech, and he is, of course, the first world leader to address the Parliament of Ukraine since the invasion began. How do you think it went down?
Well, it was extraordinary, the number of standing ovations that the Prime Minister received in the Ukrainian parliament. Clearly, this is a country that has deep affection for the United Kingdom and indeed, to a great extent, for this country's Prime Minister as well. There seems to be a personal connection between the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the President of Ukraine. We all remember their walk around through the streets of Kiev not so long ago, and indeed harking back to the UK's long support of Ukraine, training Ukrainian troops from 2015 to sending them weapons in more recent months, the first of any European country to do so. This is a strong relationship, and Boris Johnson, in his speech to the Parliament, spoke about when the United Kingdom came under threat, how when we faced the prospect, the very real prospect of invasion, when we faced bombs in London and our other great cities across this country, well, it was then known as our finest hour. And Churchill used those words, finest hour, to describe the fight of the Ukrainians. Shall we have a little listen to what he had to say?
There were some who believed the Kremlin propaganda that Russian armour would be like an irresistible force going like a knife through butter and Kiev would fall in days. Do you remember they said that? And people rang Volodymyr and they offered him safe passage out of the country. And he said, no thanks. And they said that this Rada of yours would have to be reformed outside Ukraine, maybe even in Poland or in London perhaps. And I refused to believe it. And today you have proved them completely wrong. Every one of those military experts who said that Ukraine would fall. And even in the parts of Ukraine that were temporarily captured, your populations, your indomitable populations turned out to protest day after day. And though your soldiers were always outnumbered, 3-1 it is now, they fought with the courage and the energy of lions. And you've beaten them back from Kiev. You have exploded the myth of Putin's invincibility.
Well, Tom, I understand as well there's been an announcement from the UK government that we are set to send an extra £300 million worth of support to Kiev.
Yes, that's right. The UK is stepping up yet again support in terms of financial and military aid. This is something that has come in many tranches so far, along with our sanctions on Russia. This is not something that's slowing down. If anything, the whole Western world is ratcheting up that pressure and ratcheting up that support. That's coupled with civil society efforts. There was a concert for Ukraine recently. Ed Sheeran's got out a song. You know, all of this sort of stuff is coming together. There seems to be really the United Kingdom at the support Ukraine in its hour of need.
Tom, thank you ever so much. Tom Hartwood, our political correspondent. Well, joining me on the show now is journalist Mircea Barbu. Mircea, fantastic to have you back on. I understand Odessa has been bombed recently. It seems to me that Putin is doubling down on the areas already heavily under siege. What is the latest that you've got from the Ukraine?
Well, here on the front line of the war against Russia, it's definitely preparation before anything else. Everyone is actively on standby, especially as you move east from Kiev. So you don't see as many barricades in and or around Kiev or the cities that are westwards. But the more you move east, the more people are tense and prepare for war, and barricades are in place. So this is a very much, Ukrainians are at the moment very much aware that a war is still taking place, and it's going to be in the east part of the country. They're getting ready, and that supply, that military aid that you mentioned, is definitely well received on the front line by the soldiers. It hasn't got to them yet, but we've seen aid in the past month and a half getting to these soldiers. There's still very much need. There's still a desperate need. There's still yeah.
No, so I was going to say, Mircea, I mean, are you still in Moldova at the moment? Because I understand as well that Moldova's seen a little bit of heating up, and there are ideas that the theatre of war could actually spill over the border there.
Yes, so I just crossed the border from Ukraine into Moldova, and the other day I was in Transnistria. I managed to actually get in, not as a journalist. I went in as just a tourist, so to say, although the country doesn't really have a lot of tourists. And it was an eerie feeling, to say the least, Alex. Everyone in Tiraspol, in this breakaway republic called Transnistria, was getting ready for war. Everyone was putting up barricades, checkpoints that were not there 2 weeks or 2 years ago. They're still they're being erected at the moment. Armed soldiers on every street corner, and just everyone basically very much aware of what's going on in the neighboring country, Ukraine. There's been a lot of talk here in Transnistria, in Moldova, about May 9th, when everyone is expecting, at least the intelligence sources are saying, they're expecting some provocation. They're expecting some sort of a major incident that could spark a possible conflict in the country.
And there's been a lot of reports in Western media that Putin may be a man with some serious health conditions, and that in desperation he's taken over control of the Russian offensive himself, and concerns perhaps as to what he may do next, given allegations that he might be suffering mental health issues with, for example, paranoia. Are similar reports being echoed in Ukraine and in places like Moldova?
Well, people here in Ukraine, they're not so much worried about Putin's health as they are worried about Putin's army, because they're facing frontline the people fighting this war on the orders on behalf of Putin. So yes, they are joking about it. They are mentioning his health problems. They are questioning his mental state and his decisions, but it is not a political debate about his health as much as it is in Europe at the moment. Like I said, people are much more worried about soldiers facing them on the front line, attacking them in their cities, attacking their schools, attacking civilian buildings, and so forward.
Murcha, thank you ever so much for coming on the programme again. I look forward to catching up with you again soon. It sounds like you've got a dog friend there as well to keep you company. Let's talk to Gwydion Prince, who's a former advisor to the Ministry of Defence, NATO and the UN. Gwydion, how do you see this strategically now playing out? I mean, Russian state TV has contained all the sort of balmy rhetoric that we've become used to, but Ukraine have made some significant headway, haven't they, by actually targeting Russian assets quite successfully. What do you think Putin's next move is going to be? Is this a man desperate who's going to launch a big attack, or do you think that actually the invasion is on the demise?
Alex, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you what Mr. Putin's thinking. But what I can tell you is that it certainly is the case, as you just indicated, that the attack in the Donbass has not gone as I think the Russian army had hoped. They have taken very large casualties. I think the Ukrainians have taken big casualties as well. I was looking over the last couple of days at some of the figures that we have. We rely to a degree on the Ukrainian general staff, but by and large, their figures, although sometimes optimistic in terms of the damage inflicted on the Russians, have turned out to be pretty accurate. And it looks as though in the last fortnight of last month, the success of the Ukrainian armed forces in destroying Russian armor increased quite significantly. And I think that indicates that they are beginning to deploy some of the Western technology, which has been provided late in the day, but now is there. We know that most of the heavy howitzers, which the Americans have promised, are actually now in theater. And we also know that the United Kingdom provided an extremely important technology called Mamba, which is a counter-battery radar that drives the 155 millimeter self-propelled guns. These have very long range. These are artillery which outreach the Russian artillery and have the ability automatically to backtrack the trajectory of shells so that the guns which they're driving can then destroy the Russian gun from which the shell came within a very short space of time. That sort of technology is going to make all the difference in the field, along with the thing that the Prime Minister said in his very memorable talk, which Tom was just describing. This is an army that is filled with high morale, with the justice of its cause, with a sense of self-confidence, and it's facing a Russian army that's just been defeated comprehensively, pretty much, in the north, and that's now been much too quickly deployed into the Donbass. so that it's being fed in a not technically very competent way. So we'll see what happens next. It looks as though, despite the fact that there's a slackening off in destruction of Russian equipment and materiel, they're not making very much advance across the ground. And that suggests that they're running out of steam rather than that the Ukrainians are being defeated in the field.
Gwydion, always fascinating hearing your insights. That's Gwydion Prince. He's a former advisor to the Ministry of Defence, NATO and the UN. Well, keeping me company in the studio today is the political commentator, Emma Webb. I mean, Emma, from what Gwydion has just said there, it must be extremely welcome news to the UN that we're putting yet another big injection of aid, financial and military, into Ukraine. And a big moment for Boris Johnson, being the first world leader to address the Ukrainian parliament since the invasion began.
Absolutely, and Tom alluded to this as well, is that what we're really seeing now is the development of what looks like a special relationship between the UK and Ukraine. And I think given the sheer amount of support across the United Kingdom for the Ukrainian cause, what's really interesting here is that really this is a vindication of Brexit. This is a vindication of the United Kingdom's defence not only of its own sovereignty, but of the sovereignty and democracy worldwide. And it's a real demonstration in some ways also of global Britain, because the way that we are supporting Ukraine now is actually in stark contrast to the support that has been really lagging from the EU. So I think that this is not just an important moment for Boris Johnson and for Ukraine, but this is an important moment for the United Kingdom and in setting out what sort of country we are going forward as a defender of democracy and sovereignty around the world.
Emma, I couldn't agree more. Fantastic to have your thoughts. Thank you ever so much. You're with GB News on TV and radio. After the break, it's 15 years since Madeleine McCann vanished. I'll be speaking to one of the first journalists who covered the story. But first, let's get a check on the weather forecast.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Another generally cloudy day today with some rain or showers, but brighter skies will make their way through for southern areas at least, with a few sunny spells, although that could just spark a few more showers. Weather fronts coming along later to give more general cloud and rain, but ahead of those fronts, well, it's a gloomy picture, particularly for central and northern parts of the UK. A lot of low cloud covering the hills of Wales, northern England, Scotland, and some outbreaks of mainly light rain and drizzle in these parts. Further south, though, some brighter spells emerging, especially southwest England, South Wales. However, some heavy showers also starting to develop as the afternoon progresses. 17 for Cardiff, for Southampton, but cooler for the east coast, 11 to 13 here. And we keep the generally cloudy skies overnight. Any heavy showers tend to disappear for a time before outbreaks of sporadic rain push into Northern Ireland and then spread into Scotland, northern and eventually central England, as well as parts of Wales. But there'll be some dry spells in between the rain, and temperatures won't fall far because of the extent of the clouds, so 9 or 10 degrees as we start off Wednesday. Nevertheless, a gloomy start, those outbreaks of rain trundling across the country, spilling into southeastern parts as the morning goes on. Then the skies brighten, the cloud lifts and bubbles up, and we'll see further heavy showers developing. This time the focus for heavy showers will be the Midlands into eastern and southeastern England. Brighter and drier further west and warmer for all of us. I think 19 for London there, 16 for parts of Glasgow into Newcastle as well. Heavy showers continue to spill southeastwards during Wednesday night, and then clear spells for many as we end the night. And actually Thursday looks like a mostly fine day. There will be some cloud and outbreaks of rain in the far north, but otherwise sunnier further south and warmer.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 15 years since a horrific crime shook the nation and the world. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann prompted a wave of torrid accusations and headlines and internationally suspected sightings. Yet to this day, nobody has been charged. Today, Madeleine would be 18 years old. The suspected kidnapping tore into a quiet Portuguese community of Praia de Luz, saw her parents diabolically framed during a moment of intense despair for the couple, and led to widespread criticism of the handling of the investigation by Portuguese police. Recent months have seen a new suspect come into the frame, a German convict already serving time for rape, whose mobile phone records put him in the vicinity of the night of Madeleine's disappearance. But he maintains his innocence, while others say that by focusing on one suspect, the real perpetrator could still be at large. 4 eyewitnesses report seeing a girl identical to Madeleine in Morocco, with one couple adamant that the toddler they saw was asking for her mummy. Heartbreaking accounts that bring home the horror of a case that to this day remains unsolved. Why did the disappearance of Madeleine become so internationally infamous? And with such global coverage, how come nobody has ever been caught? Well, Emma, I remember back to that time. I was working as a young trainee journalist, and all the discussion in the newsroom, as I recall, was actually questioning whether or not the parents themselves were involved. I mean, it's pretty shocking stuff looking back at it.
Well, I think that in cases like this, it's important that the police don't rule out potential suspects, because you never know what could have happened. But I think what is clear is that in cases like this, in cases, missing person cases, particularly with children, time really is of the essence. And so much time was lost in the early stages of that investigation. And now we're 15 years on. Doesn't seem to be looking as if it's much further towards being solved. It's clear that the police in Portugal and those involved in the investigation have utterly bungled it. And now, because I understand that the Portuguese have a statute of limitations on prosecutions for crimes, and it ends at 15 years. So that's roundabout now. So there's been some speculation today about whether this is the reason why they have named this particular suspect, as you say, who's already serving time. He's claimed that he has an alibi, which may not stand up, because he claims that he was actually in a caravan somewhere else that evening having sex with a German woman, and then drove her to the airport the next day, and claims that she was arrested for carrying a pepper spray, and that the police should have a record of that. So I think that this is the latest instalment really in an ongoing bungled investigation, and I don't think that there are many people who are going to have much hope that this is going to lead to any serious wins in this case, as it were. But of course, the parents are still holding out hope that one day they'll be reunited with their daughter in this, what is really a horrific case that has shocked the world.
I do wonder, with cases like this that really capture the public's imagination and generate such huge headlines around the world, whether that's a help or a hindrance, because you'd think with the amount of images of Madeleine that have been published internationally that someone somewhere, if she was still alive, would have seen her and be able to identify the person responsible or indeed be able to say what happened to her. But then you also wonder, with all of this headline generation, whether that could lead to so many false leads with people such as potential eyewitnesses thinking they've seen a child that resembles Madeleine. Because when a story is proliferated so widely, there must be numerous toddlers out there who could resemble the photograph of the little girl in the newspaper.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's possible the police will be inundated with people who believe that they've seen Madeleine or want to be involved in the case somehow. Amateur investigators who we've seen with other cases as well, who want to get involved in some way and think that they may be able to help solve the case, and that might be a hindrance. But on the other hand, you can understand why particularly the parents would want to create as much publicity as possible around this case, because children go missing around the world every year and we don't hear about them and we don't see as much interest as we have in the Madeleine McCann case. And I think it's particularly because, you know, Madeleine McCann is obviously a very beautiful little girl. Her parents were very effective in speaking to the media and getting this case out there. And so I think that it really has sort of pulled on people's heartstrings, and people have wanted for her to be reunited with her family. But it is important to remember that there are many cases that go unsolved and many children who go missing regularly around the world, and they don't get the attention that Madeleine McCann's case has got.
I mean, could we potentially accuse elements of the media of a sort of preferential prejudice when it comes to the exposure that this one particular case got?
You see it with other cases as well. The Sarah Everard case is another example of this. That was something that really caught the public's attention. But there are many other cases of violence against women, violence against men that don't receive the same public attention. And maybe it's something that should be studied, why certain cases catch public attention more than others, and what the implications of that are on investigations and on the public's understanding of the sorts of problems that surround these crimes.
Emma, thank you ever so much. Well, joining us now on the show is John Clark, who is the editor of the Olive Press and was one of the first journalists at the scene when Madeleine was abducted. John, talk us through those first sort of days and weeks and how the story took off and, well, rather spiralled out of control.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's actually tomorrow morning at around 9:30 a.m. that I arrived in Pradaluz here from Andalusia in Spain, and it was a sort of 3.5-hour journey drive from where I live in Ronda, and I got a phone call at the crack of dawn from the Daily Mail foreign desk, and by the time I got there, I was also working for the Mirror and the Sun, so it was quite clear this was a story that was breaking and was of great interest to newspaper readers and certainly any TV, anyone back in the UK. And when I arrived, first thing, it was incredible how quiet it was there. I mean, it was only one or two police at the front of the house. There were no other real journalists around at the time, and I think people who'd been up through the night, perhaps helping with the search, were having a couple of hours kip and were ready to come out and help again. And so I was actually able, believe it or not, to go up to the back of the apartment to walk under a flimsy piece of police tape and step up the steps right up to the front of the apartment. And as you probably know now, I think 26, 27, 28 people actually trounced right the way through that apartment in the early hours of the morning, making the crime scene completely null and void, really, for future investigators. And I think the golden hour was a complete disaster from start to finish. I did my best in those early hours, and I got straight on the ground, and classic gumshoe reporting, just went round and asked lots and lots of questions. And I've continued to do that to this day.
So, I mean, I'm glad you said that you'll continue to do it to this day, because I wanted to ask you, what is your hunch on the current guy who's in the frame, who's serving time in German prison? Is that a ruse, essentially, to keep the case alive? Do you think, from the people you've spoken to, there is plausibility in the accusation he could be responsible? Or is there a risk that we're taking our eye off the ball and that the perpetrator may still be at large?
No, I think, as you probably noticed recently with the Portuguese police making him an official suspect, an arguido, as it's called in Portugal, they completely agree with the German investigation that's been underway. Let's not forget there was an appeal in 2020, but it was underway from 2016. And in fact, in 2013, they first brought in Christian Bruckner to answer some questions about his movements at the time. And I can tell you that the evidence, there's lots of circumstantial evidence, but today I was made party to some evidence to suggest that there may be traces of Maddie's DNA in one of the cars that Christian Bruckner was driving on the night that she went missing. And as you know, he was living very close to the resort and regularly burgled homes in the resort. And clearly has a long track record of child sex abuse. He's currently in prison serving 7 years for rape, and it will be charged actually this month, I'm told by my sources from the German prosecutor's office, with 3 if not 4 cases in the next couple of weeks, with the Madeleine charge likely to come later in the year.
John, thank you ever so much for joining us on the programme. Fascinating stuff. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, are delays to the UK's Rwanda immigration plan encouraging more asylum seekers to cross the channel? That's after the break. But first, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister has told Ukrainian MPs that their country must and will win the war. In a video link addressing the Ukrainian Parliament, Boris Johnson said that this is Ukraine's finest hour and they've broken what he calls the irresistible force of Putin's war machine.
Even in the parts of Ukraine that were temporarily captured, your populations, your indomitable populations, turned out to protest day after day. And though your soldiers were always outnumbered, 3-1 it is now, they fought with the courage and the energy of lions. And you've beaten them back from Kiev. You have exploded the myth of Putin's invincibility.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced a new wave of retaliatory sanctions against the West. According to a decree signed by Putin, Russia will forbid the exports of products and raw materials to people and entities that it's sanctioned. Well, details of which countries and firms are affected by the measures have not been provided. The Labour leader has condemned the government for inefficiency in processing the visas of Ukrainian refugees. The government's being threatened with legal action by 2 groups representing potential sponsors under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. They say unreasonable delays are putting refugees at risk. It could be months until the first plane leaves Britain carrying Channel migrants to Rwanda. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister confirmed that the government has received paperwork stating that it will face legal challenges. The government previously indicated that Boris Johnson wanted to see the scheme start by the end of May. You're up to date on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Shortly, Alex will be back with We Need to Talk About.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Last month, the government announced its resettlement scheme for migrants who illegally enter the UK to be sent to Rwanda. The Home Secretary's controversial policy was boasted as a deterrent to those who pay criminal gangs to cross the channel in small boats, with numerous headlines doubtless fed by the government's spin machine claiming credit for recently reduced channel crossings. Yet the respite wasn't to last for long. The number of channel migrants reaching the UK hit a new record over the bank holiday weekend. Is it down to the Home Secretary's plans facing legal battles and predictable delays, emboldening would-be entrants? Or is it time for Priti Patel to go back to square one already? Our South East of England reporter Ellie Costello is in Dover for us now. Ellie, give us an update on the number of people crossing the channel over the weekend.
Well, good afternoon, Alex. And after an 11-day break, it was a very busy weekend in Dover in terms of migrant crossings, I'm afraid. The Ministry of Defence says that 254 migrants were detected in 7 small boats on Sunday. Yesterday, the French authorities say they stopped 15 migrants making the journey, but 293 people did manage to make the crossing on Monday. Huge numbers. 550 people making the crossing in those 2 days alone. And this morning it's rainy and windy in Dover. It has been all day, but this morning at 6 a.m. There were reports that around 40 people made the crossing on a single boat. So we could still see numbers crossing today, but not as high as we did see over the weekend. And as I suggested earlier, there was an 11-day break, and many people had hoped that that meant the Rwanda plan was working. People were not going to risk making that journey across the channel. But now those high numbers over the weekend suggest that that was more down to the poor weather that was taking place before this weekend. Well, the figures for this bank holiday weekend take us up to 7,000 people making the crossing so far this year. 28,000 made the crossing last year. So based on those figures, the forecast is now that the number of people making the crossing across the channel will nearly double to 60,000 people by the end of 2022. And let's not forget how dangerous this journey can be. 37 people lost their lives in the channel last year. So there are concerns that the more people that come over, there will be that inevitable loss of life as well. Now, this Rwanda plan does not seem to be the deterrent that people had hoped it would be, so far at least. And the French are claiming that it's actually creating a window of opportunity for human smuggling gangs. They are encouraging migrants to make the journey now before the Rwanda plan is enacted. And as we've heard, those legal challenges are going to be brought, which will push that Rwanda plan back in time. And in the meantime, it will be encouraging more and more people to get here before the threat of Rwanda is over their heads. A former Director General of Border Force, Tony Smith, has said that at the moment, to human trafficking gangs, this seems like a game of bluff because no one has been sent to Rwanda yet. Well, Alex, whilst this Rwanda plan is being delayed, of course, we're coming into those summer months, those hot months of July and August, which are the most popular time for migrant crossings. There are concerns that as more people come over, they are going to be putting their lives at risk.
We can go back to my studio guest, political commentator Emma Webb. I mean, first of all, we read that only 2% of migrants who've crossed legally would likely ever end up on an aeroplane to Rwanda. Then we heard that a lot of the airlines were refusing to cooperate. And the fact of the matter is, you know, there are people crossing on boats who are actually Albanians, chucking passports away, pretending to be from the Middle East. And, you know, otherwise, you've got poor, desperate people being told either if they're Albanians, they'll have a job at the end of it, or if they're fleeing from, you know, a country gripped in poverty or war, that they're guaranteed safety and asylum. So why on earth should a bungled government scheme act as a deterrent?
This is a complete disaster. Just looking at the numbers there, 60,000 people predicted or forecasted that is how many people will be coming illegally across the Channel in the next year. People around the country are not going to tolerate the failure of the Home Office to deal with this problem. The government need to get it in hand. But the problem is, and you just alluded to it there, that when the government come up with solutions, for example, asking the border force to push boats back, which is a solution that has been used in the Aegean, to push boats back towards France, the border force refused to do that. When we suggest taking them to Rwanda to be processed in Rwanda, the people who operate the flights refuse to take them. So the government are up against not only in practical difficulties in terms of those who might be able to help with these sorts of plans in executing them, but they also are suffering with the challenges that come with the activist lawyers who repeatedly try to prevent deportations from taking place. When the Rwanda plan was announced, I originally said that we shouldn't count our chickens when it came to how many people were coming. The announcement that there were 0 people coming across the Channel was clearly because of bad weather. Now we're seeing that is being borne out. I think that it was obvious from the start that the Rwanda plan was going to face a legal challenge. Now, as we've just seen reporting from Ellie there, that it's likely that this is going to be pushed further and further back. Meanwhile, we've incentivised a rush to try and get across the Channel. The whole situation, I think, is disastrous. It's intolerable, and the British people are not going to put up with it for much longer. Something is going to have to change, and it's possible that the current government, the Conservative Party, will suffer in the elections as a result.
Emma, thank you. Well, now, it turns out a load of those eye-watering COVID fines issued to everyday folk during the pandemic have no legal grounding whatsoever. Who would have thought? I exposed last month that when cases for fixed penalty notices do reach court, if some brave soul, not cowed by grisly threats of a criminal record or jail sentence, dares challenge their punishment, often issued incorrectly by authorities who couldn't keep up with the ever-changing rules and regs and without any sort of appeals process, over a third are found to have no justification whatsoever. With fines ranging from hundreds to tens of thousands of pounds, often for the alleged crime of basically living life as a normal, sociable human, the government have snatched huge sums from a terrified population while racking up a pretty party bill themselves. Surely it is now time to just refund the lot of them. Let's talk now to criminal defence lawyer Lucinda Nichols, who has represented clients who've been successful in challenging fines for alleged COVID lockdown breaches. Fantastic to have you on, Lucinda. I mean, this was an unprecedented time, but the way the government set about imposing these fines or giving authorities the right to do that was equally unprecedented, with no appeals process and constantly changing regulations. The authorities charged with giving out these fines could barely follow.
That's correct. It's very much a situation whereby the regulations were changed so frequently that it's quite clear that those that were enforcing them didn't really know what the exemptions were or the explanations behind it. So there was a heavy-handed approach with regards to how they were enforced. And as a result, we've been able to challenge them in court and have been rather successful.
Now, are those people who haven't paid the fines and have had summons issued, or are these people who've paid fines who want some sort of legal redress to say, well, I don't think I should have done?
No, these are people, individuals and businesses who have chosen not to pay the financial penalty or the fixed penalty notice that they received at the relevant time. And then the matter has progressed through to the court system, and we've challenged them legally in court following the criminal justice system.
I mean, this must be music to the ears of people who decided not to pay the fines and have had their moment in court. But for those people who did pay, and the sums for a lot of people were eye-watering, starting in the hundreds and progressing up to thousands, if not tens of thousands, do you think there could be an opportunity now for those people to say, well, hang on, at the time I felt very much bullied and terrified into making the decisions to just pay the fine. Such was the strength of the communications from the authorities. Do you think they could also have their day in court too?
I don't think it's a situation where that can be revisited anymore. The only thing that I think should be considered is whether or not our members of parliament want to consider a review relating to all of the prosecutions that occurred. Many of these individuals who have ended up going to court can't afford solicitors. This is not something that you can get legal aid for. It's not publicly funded. It's only individuals who have the financial circumstances and stability that have been able to take on these masses. And that's why the majority of our clients have been businesses who have been accused of breaching the regulations. Now, taking that to the next step, of course, a lot of people who have been found within these COVID courts that are still ongoing can't see a lawyer, can't speak to a lawyer, and are being prosecuted by police officers. So it seems that nobody is aware of what the legislation actually demonstrated at the time. And because it consistently kept changing, the exemptions and the defences that could be put forward, a lot of people don't know. And that's where there's been huge conflict with regards to the proceedings in court.
Lucinda, keep up the good work. And if only more people had access to your services. Lucinda Nichols there, who's successfully been appealing on behalf of clients some of the fixed penalty notices issued during the pandemic. Surely, now the government itself, Number 10 itself, has had fines issued. If they couldn't follow the regulations, why should we have been expected to? Surely it's time for a mass refund of the lot of them. Oh, now I had the wonderful pleasure this bank holiday weekend of escaping from the independent Republic of London and getting back into real Britain, where the good folk of our fair isles time and again proved themselves to be the most considerate, funny and generous in the world. It's a shame we can't bottle up Britishness and export it internationally. A dose of forming a queue or offering a brew would go a long way in a lot of places I can think of. Proud patriot? Me? You better believe it. But like every proper Brit, there's also nothing I love more than a good old moan. So grab your cuppa and stiffen your upper. It's time for the Alex Agenda. Well, you don't want to be a woman in America right now. Between the left and the right, hard-won protections are being cruelly dismantled for hundreds of millions caught in the escalating culture wars. First, the radical left came, extolling the virtues of gender fluidity and redefining what it even meant to be a woman, encouraging young girls to hack off their breasts and opening up intimate spaces to men. Then, the radical right, with their Trumpist appeal to Christian fundamentalists, have taken command of women's bodies with an expected landmark ruling that could potentially see more than half the states in America ban abortion, even if childbirth risks a woman's life. Underpinned by a Kardashian-led porn culture that reduces women to debased sexual props. For a nation that spent $1 trillion fighting the Taliban, perhaps it's time they looked at their own appalling treatment of half the population. So the WHO have come out with the latest epidemic warnings, and this time I'm minded to agree with the urgency. Apparently 2/3 of adults in Europe are now overweight or obese, and it's not exactly hard to believe. But what's being done about it? It's all very well Joe Wicks lunging in his lounge. Until what we eat is taken seriously, years of life will be lost while the health service is hungry for more. I'm not fat-shaming, because personal responsibility only goes so far when half the stuff sold in supermarkets, even those cruelly marketed as healthy, are basically poisonous, making the nation fatter day by day while the government merely encourages everyone to go for a jog. If the majority of people actually knew how laden with sugar that low-fat yogurt is, and that high-street frappuccino is basically your entire daily calorie intake, people would be shocked into changing their habits. We buy food expecting it to be safe, free from rat droppings and botulism. But safe also means no hidden additives making half the world desperately ill. Until government regulates the unscrupulous food industry, which are no better than big tobacco, bad diets will continue to slowly kill people, bite by bite. Now, my good friend, who has gone out to report on the war in Ukraine, is having a really hard time paying his bills. Not because he's on a dreadful wage, but because his money is no good anywhere. As soon as the proprietor knows he's British, the tab is written off. It's no surprise, therefore, that the mayor of Odessa has proclaimed he is naming a square after Boris Johnson. The UK has led from the front in arms provision, urgent sanctions and international diplomacy, as much of the EU has navel-gazed over their Russian energy dependence, and America is led by a narcoleptic. Now, going back to Gloucestershire this weekend, I saw countless Ukrainian flags flying from houses. Forget what the self-loathing left have ever said. We are proud, we are principled, and we are Great Britain. Well, let's get the final word on all of this from Emma Webb. Anything tantalising you from my selection today?
Gosh, it's such a great sort of sweep of news this week. I think that, and this is a controversial opinion, and I don't think that you're going to like this view very much, but I actually think that the news from the US deserves balanced coverage. The decision by the Supreme Court has essentially been to overturn this original judgment, Roe versus Wade, which stated that abortion was a constitutional right, the idea that abortion is a human right. That was the reasoning behind that judgment has been questioned for some time, and they've now decided to overturn that. It's being portrayed as a ban on abortion in many states across the US, but what it actually is essentially a devolution of the power to vote on abortion issues in a country which is far more divided than in Europe. It's far more divided in the United States about abortion rights. And so the decision has been to allow, at a state level, those decisions to be made when it comes to abortion. It will allow the people to make a decision for themselves. And I think it's very difficult and this is why this is something that I want to pick out from what you have said there, is I think it's very difficult for us in the UK to discuss these issues, because one half of the argument has for a very long time been missing, which is that whilst one side, as we saw with Amnesty International today tweeting abortion is a human right, the other side would say that a right to life is literally a human right. And the view that an unborn child is a human life and needs to be protected is a view that is it needs to be discussed, and I think that the issue surrounding whether abortion is a human right is something that is still contested around the world, particularly in the United States. And so portraying it as simply being a culture wars issue, I think, doesn't do justice to the complexities of what is going on in the context of the United States.
But does it not feel like backsliding? That surely, whether this argument is best between a couple, it's best for a woman to make up her own mind over her body. And surely this opens the door now for lots of states, particularly those in the Bible Belt, to just outlaw abortion point blank. And then, tens of thousands of women could be in a desperate situation.
I think this is a really complicated issue, and it is, even discussing it, even on a channel that promotes free speech, is something that feels to me like you may tread on a landmine no matter what you say on this issue, and I don't think that that's right. And I think it's great that GB News allows people to share views of all sorts of stripes and positions, and I think that what is important in the discussion in the United States is that the argument that abortion is a human right is something that I say is something that is disputed. And yeah, it might be unfair to say that if you live in a state where abortion is banned, then you can always move to somewhere like California, where it's very unlikely to be banned. But what this is essentially an argument in the United States context. They're saying that this is not something that can be interpreted out of the Constitution, which doesn't legalise abortion. And so they're making a constitutional point, and it's being portrayed as a ban on abortion, as an attack on women, and I don't think that that is a fair interpretation of this judgment and its implications.
Emma, thank you so much for your balance, and always delightful having you on the programme. You've been absolutely wonderful today. We will have you back. The glorious Emma Webb, ladies and gentlemen. Well, that's about it for now. Join me again for We Need to Talk About It on GB News at the same time, 2 o'clock tomorrow. Coming up next, it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey. But first, it's time for a check on the weather forecast. Bye-bye from me.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's a fairly cloudy day out there once again. Showers are now starting to develop in places. These are heaviest towards the southwest as well as parts of Wales, especially over higher parts of Wales and the southwest. But they'll die away through the evening after, well, another band of rain pushes into Northern Ireland, Scotland, Northern England, Northern and Central Wales, and then eventually the Midlands and the South East overnight. With the cloud and that rain, on and off as it will be, temperatures won't fall very far, 10 or 11 Celsius as we start off Wednesday. But it's a cloudy and damp start to the day as a couple of weak weather fronts cross the country. High pressure not far away, that's why the fronts are generally weak. So it's on and off rain, most of it light, some moderate bursts. And as it pushes southeast, skies do tend to brighten very slowly, I think. It will stay mostly cloudy, but the cloud will lift, it will break up. And as that happens, it will warm up and further showers will form, initially towards the west, and then later on, the focus for showers, the Midlands, eastern Scotland, eastern England. Temperatures widely mid to high teens, so it's a warmer day for many, but those showers will be lively where they occur, hail and thunder mixed in. They'll also be quite slow moving. But they do die away into Wednesday night, clear spells for many then. I don't think it'll be a cold night because we've got warmer air arriving from the southwest. So again, despite the clear spells, temperatures holding up into the high single